Okay, so today we have with us Matthew Job. Matthew is the CEO of Crompton Greaves Consumer Electricals Limited, and he joined the company in September 2015. In his 5-year stint, he has been instrumental in transforming the company into one of the top performers in the industry with basically leading profitability. The company has delivered industry's highest shareholder returns of 25% per annum in this period, and more than two-thirds of analysts today rate Crompton as the top pick in the industry. And in recognition for this stellar performance, Economic Times recently awarded Matthew Job as one of the most promising business leaders of Asia for 2020-2021. So congratulations, Matthew, once again for this. So Matthew started his career with Philips Electronics India Limited, and after a long stint of 15 years with Philips, where he held several key positions both in India and abroad, he joined Grohe India Private Limited in the end of 2009 as VP and Managing Director. During his 2-year tenure with Grohe, Matthew was instrumental in quadrupling the company's business and in establishing the company as one of the leading industrial players. So during this period, Grohe India also, twice won the CEO's award for being the best performing market for the company globally. So since February 2012 and till he joined Crompton, Matthew was the managing director of Recall Thermo Limited. So under his distinguished leadership, again, Recall transformed its business and became the leader in water heaters. So Matthew has a track record of turning around and leading the companies to one of their best performance. And Matthew is an alumnus of IIM Calcutta, and I've had the privilege of being his batchmate at IMC. So thank you, Matthew, for joining us.
Yep, my pleasure.
And so this show is focused on learning through real life stories. So, tell us a bit about your personal life journey beyond all these, success and qualification.
So I basically come from a middle class family in Kerala. So brought up in with typical, I would say, traditional family values. A small town, compared to the metropolises of Kerala, anyway, did not have a very big town. So pretty much, I would say, brought up in a typical traditional family in Kerala. My father, was the youngest of 7 children, and he that is 1960s. He went far from Kerala to do his studies also in Delhi, in Varanasi. So he was a person, I would say, who took a lot of pain to get his education, and he always felt that education was a way to to progress in life. We were, I would say, as a family, when of modest means. So obviously, he felt that was one way to really progress in life. My mother is a homemaker, and I have one younger brother who is a systems and software engineer. So I would say, a lot of what I learned in my childhood, things like honesty, I would say discipline, punctuality, respect for elders. So I remember that, if in a family, if any of the elders were to walk into the room, I'm not saying my immediate family, but if my grandfather or some senior members used to walk into the home, the culture was the youngsters would stand up and show respect. So what I'm trying to say is, very traditional values, and I think as that has been the foundation on which my personality and everything and my value system has been built. I did all my initial schooling in Kerala. Initially I started off co-ed school, but that co-ed school only had co-ed till 4th standard. So after that, it is only for girls. So I had to move out of that school in 4th. Then I went to another school for a couple of years. At that time, my father was actually working as, he was teaching library science in Kerala University. When I was in 7th, my father got the opportunity to actually go on deputation to a country in Africa, called Ethiopia. So then I moved along with my parents, and my younger brother, obviously, to Ethiopia. I studied there from 7th to 10th in an Indian school. So I think, during this period, I would say pretty much from 1st to 10th, one of the things was, I used to work hard, and I used to be, I would say, topper pretty much in all the classes. And I think that goes with it. Has also been driven by the fact that my father had worked very hard, and it instilled that the sense of hard work in me and my brother as well. After finishing my 10th, I came back to Kerala again to pursue my +2. My parents were still in Ethiopia, so I came back. I joined a school in Trivandrum, in boarding, and I think I would say that was the first time. That was a school in which we had excellent students. I would say best students. I would say almost the best students from the best schools in Kerala. After 10th, they all come into the school.
Mm.
It is one of the aspirational schools. So that was the first time I felt, I faced competition of a very severe order, and that was supposed. I faced that also later in life, but that was the first time, out of over 35 kids in class, and I think, from being top one or top two in most of my schooling thus far, I was not even in the top 10, maybe not even in the top 15. So it was the first time, I felt that, and since I had defined my life till then in terms of, achievement, standing in the being number one, and it was a big shock for me. Of course, it's also the first time I was away from my parents, living alone in boarding. So it was a little bit of a struggle, I would say. One, because of the fact that you're away from your parents and the comfort of home for the first time, but also because, the first time I was facing a competition of a very different order. So that, did take me, I would say, a couple of months to really get adjusted to the fact that, you have to navigate everything by yourself, because you don't have the opportunity to go back and, talk to your parents in the evening.
Yes.
And, you remember those times there was no internet, the phone connectivity, you had to do trunk dialing and all those stuff. It was almost impossible to connect. The only thing you could do was to write a letter to your parents. So we did not have the kind of opportunity you have today, where you could just go call your parents and say, I'm facing this problem, and at least they can try to guide you. So I spent 2 years there, and, this was +2. So obviously I was doing both maths and biology. And, in those times, unlike today, it was pretty much, at least in Kerala, I remember, I don't have that much exposure of that period of time to other states. It was either engineering or medicine, that was the way you made your life. In fact, my first preference was that time was medicine, and then number 2 was engineering. So I did, I wrote my entrance exams for Kerala, both engineering and medicine. I thought I had done extremely well in the medical exam and pretty poorly in the engineering entrance exam. In parallel, I also wrote other exams for places like, JIPMER, Pondicherry, the Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, Christian Medical College, Vellore.
Okay.
And all I thought I had done reasonably well. But as luck would have it, I didn't qualify in any of the medical exams. I only qualified engineering in Kerala. And medical exam, for example, in Christian Medical College, Vellore, which was for me the aspirational college at that point of time, I was in the waiting list number 2.
Okay.
And I remained number 2 till the cutoff date. As luck would have it, while I had thought I would go for medicine, I ended up in engineering. So first I thought, okay, let me do a year of engineering, and maybe, by the time I can write the medical exam again. So I went through the first year, made some very good friends in college. I was not really enjoying engineering, but I loved college life. I loved the friends I had made. And, it was really very different from school life, because school was boarding, and it was very, it was a Christian school. It was very strict. So, it had time for you to get up, and time you could sleep. You could not talk, when the study time was also. It's pretty, and hostel life in engineering was very different. So the first time you had full freedom, you could do whatever you want. So when the time came to decide whether I should write my medical exam again, entrance, I somehow decided not to. And I went through engineering. Engineering was, I didn't particularly love engineering. Again, it comes back to the fact that, my parents had taught me that, once you are into something, you must put your heart and soul into it. So I tried my best. And again, I was not in the top 20% in the engineering college. Passed with, not with distinction, but with close to distinction. Could have been much better, but okay. I mean, that was that. And then I passed out of engineering. And it was not easy to find a job for an engineer, definitely not in Kerala, because Kerala did not, because of its kind of lack of industry, most people would have to go outside to work. As luck would have it, after my engineering, I appeared for a few opportunities, and I got selected in Apollo Tyres. Now, Apollo Tyres is a company which had only one factory at that point of time, which was in Kerala, and was facing a lot of trade union issues. So they had decided to set up a second factory in Limdi in Gujarat. So they had selected about 20 graduate engineer trainees, to send to the new factory, with all kinds of, some of them were to be electrical, and I was an electrical engineer. So they trained me for about 8-9 months in factory in Kerala, where I was doing multiple shifts, not really enjoying it, because, your body clock was screwed up, and, anyway, I was not a very avid engineer. So in the meanwhile, I was wondering what can I do, because this didn't seem to be something I really enjoyed doing, and definitely not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So, I was thinking of what engineers who don't do engineering typically do. Okay. So I asked a few friends of mine, whoever I could access. It's not like today where you could access so many people. And one of my relatives, he had gone this route of engineering and did his MBA from one of the top schools. So I said, okay, this seems interesting. Maybe more as an escape route from engineering rather than a real love for going that stream. Okay, I said, let's give it a try. Worst case, you have to try it again. So I did a reasonable amount of preparation. Decided I liked CAT. I wrote the CAT exam. I thought I had done pretty badly, because I thought, this is no chance. So meanwhile, after riding my cat, I got shifted from Kerala to this factory
Gujarat. Yeah.
in Gujarat. So again, I went there. I was going, outside the Kerala for the first time, actually, because
Oh.
even my engineering was in Kerala. I was going outside. Hindi was okay for me, but I was never spoken Hindi per se in my life. So again, went to Gujarat, again, shift working, we had, we have 5 or 6 of us from Kerala at that time sent together. So we had, good friendship with each other. And then we managed slowly and little by then. I was very surprised when I got a call for interview from all the 4 IIMs. Because I thought I'd done pretty badly. I was pretty sure there's no chance I would get in. And meanwhile, I also tried to, for MBA at Cochin University of Science and Technology, which I thought would be a much easier thing to crack than any of the IIMs. But as luck would have it, I didn't crack QCET as well. So, I ended up not really doing that well. With that in my back of my mind, I knew this CAT was not going to happen. But some luck, I would say, I got a call from all the 4 for interview. I went through the interviews and, the first one was pretty tough. The first one was IIM is pretty tough. All back to my engineering questions. And I was hoping that the other 3 would not test my engineering skills. And as luck would have it, neither IIM Calcutta nor IIM Bangalore asked me any question on engineering. And those were the 2 eventually that I managed to crack. And now there came the question, which one do I go to? Bangalore was closer home. Calcutta was far away, had to travel 48, 50 hours by train. Again, I asked a couple of my friends and then finally decided I'll go to IIM Calcutta. Went there. I thought, getting in was the toughest part. But I realized after reaching there that getting in was actually the easiest part, especially with the initial year, the kind of subjects and the kind of profs we were running into. And, the competition I had in Trivandrum in my school seemed much less when I landed up in Calcutta, because here you had real tough guys like you, Rupan, and everybody else. Somehow, the first year was really tough, because not only because of the competition, but because of the subjects, the kind of teaching was different, kind of subjects was different, the kind of grading was different. Somehow managed to get past the first year, and second year was comparatively better, I would say. I had chosen, at that time everybody was going finance, but I decided finance was not for me. After the first year courses, went for marketing. It did reasonably well in marketing, I would say. And then came placement. And again, placement again, I see. I had reasonably good marks in marketing, but so day 1 got over, I didn't get placed. So day 2 got over, also I didn't get placed. So I was really worried on day 3 whether I will end up as the sole guy at the end of the session who did not have a job. But luckily on day 3, I got placed in Philips. This is where my career started. So I joined Philips as a management trainee. A couple of guys who had done summer training, there in Philips did not give me a very positive image. So, but that's what I had got, and I just like in engineering, like you get in there and you try to make the best of it. I went in there with a very positive, not thinking that I just need to cut a few months here and there and then go back and try for one of the more sought after companies. So I spent 15 years in Philips, which is, by the time most of my batchmates, would have changed at least 5 or 6 jobs. In fact, I was the 20 management trainees which Philips had recruited. By year 5 or 6, I was the only one who remained there. So, probably they thought something was wrong with me. And sometimes I used to question myself, when I heard my batchmates have changed 2, 3, 4 jobs, I was wondering, am I making a mistake by staying? And the only thing that kept me there was the fact that in this 15 years, I did about 10 different roles. Most of them in India, but a couple of roles abroad. I felt I had a good career in Philips. Not financially though, but in terms of job satisfaction. The surprising thing for me, in the 15 years, I never thought about money, because as long as you could take care of small family, you could. I moved quite a few locations. I started from Bombay, went to Bangalore, from Bangalore to Calcutta, Calcutta to Gurgaon, Gurgaon to Hong Kong, Hong Kong back to Gurgaon. That was my Philips life. When I was in Bangalore, I got married to my wife Seema, who was an electrical engineer, also from Kerala. The only thing this kind of moves did was, she always was the one who was making the sacrifice, in the sense that every time what would happen, we would move to a new location. It would take about 6 months to settle down. She would find a job. She always would tell me, hey, now that I've got a job, it's very high chance that you will get a transfer. And it's always like clockwork. A year and a half thereafter, something happened. I had to move, and I moved all these locations. And every time she had to quit. So that's one of the challenges we faced. But she was the one who always made the sacrifice. And then and the surprising thing is, I was never really, till that point of time, I never was really looking out. Although I was wondering whether I ever made a mistake staying 15 years. But after 15 years, finally, one job came in, and it was a very small company. In Philips, the last position I held was heading marketing for lighting, and I was also the business head for lamps. Pretty reasonable sized business, about 2,000 crores. And here came an opportunity where I was asked to manage a 50 crore business. Okay, many people call me stupid that, this guy stayed in one company for 15 years. Well, while most guys moved 5, 6 roles, they must have gone much higher. And then when he was choosing to think of making a move, he was going to a company which, by anyone's standards, was not anywhere as well known as Philips. 1,500 crore business to 50 crores. So they felt that this guy was either stuck, and he couldn't make it any further in Philips. That's why he moved. But I took the chance and moved, into that role. And I had 2 years in Grohe, which I felt was extremely good. In the sense that for the first time, I took a real risk, of course, because here I was moving into a company where it could make or break my career. Thereafter, a very different company, and which we will discuss a bit as we go along. Small company, 50 crores. It was a company in India at that time for almost 5 years. It had grown in 5 years from 0 to 50. I landed there and I was given the target of quadrupling the business in 2 years. But it was a very hectic, high pressure 2 years. That's the only time in my career I felt that, I never had any, I would say, slack in time. I was fully loaded. And my team was fully loaded. So even at 5:30 in the morning, if I would send an SMS, my team would respond almost immediately. So either it means, I made their life miserable, or they were pretty much very highly charged as well. But 2 years there, 2.5 years, extremely successful, I would say. We became the fastest growing, as you mentioned briefly in the, we were in competition with big names like Jaguar. We were really starting to make major breakthrough. We were the best performing company, for the Grohe globally, which is why we won twice the CEO's award for the best performing market. In fact, once we were starting to win it with such regularity, the Grohe CEO decided that I will do two awards. One for the developing countries and one for developed. Otherwise, they felt India would always win it. So we have a very good career again. And after a couple of years, I decided to move to Racold. And just to give you a perspective, Philips was not used to be listed in India, but eventually got delisted. It was a classical MNC, which most of us have dealt with all its complexities. Then Grohe was a private equity-led company, very different. And Racold was owned by an Italian family, so very different kind of mindset, much more conservative than Grohe. Grohe was quadrupling in 2 years. Racold would never think about it, although the size of the business was the same. So very different. But here, the additional responsibility I had was I had to also handle a factory. It was the first time I was handling a factory directly, including direct negotiation with the trade union. And we only had one factory, so the union knew when to apply the screws on us. Very good experience working with a family. I always had this feeling that working with a family-led enterprise would be very difficult. And to my surprise, I found not really. I got tremendous amount of support. Very good, relationship with Italian owners, but it's professionally managed. I spent about 2.5 years there. Again, I would say very, very great experience, primarily with the factory. So that was great. And then after almost 3 years there, came this opportunity in Crompton. And here was a very different company. The first time I was going to work in a board-run company, but where the erstwhile promoters had just exited. And, and we had two PEs who had taken over the 35% stake. So a very different kind of company, much bigger in size than what I had done so far. 4,000-5,000 crores versus 200-300 crores in the previous two. And that is the last 5 years of my journey where I've spent here, I would say. So pretty much, I would say all kinds of companies, big, small, mature ones. I would say, all kinds of ownership style, as I mentioned, all kinds of experiences. So that's what I would say in brief, or not so brief, about personal life so far and professional life.
Yeah. So see, let me take you back in time when you actually two places you faced solid rejections that you did not get selected in the medical world.
Yes.
And second is that, first 2 days of placement at IMC, and I know how stressful it can be. Can you go back in time and because many people go through this and many people will go through later different rejections.
Yeah.
What in you allowed you to stay centered despite that?
I would say one of the most important things, was, let me go back to my childhood. As I mentioned, we were from a middle class family. Okay, but so middle class family at that point of time was modest means. So we were pretty much used to living, to doing the best with whatever we have. Okay, so just to give you a perspective, those days, going out to watch a movie once in 3 to 4 months was already for me considered. I used to consider it as as like going on a vacation now for a month abroad. So that was the kind of thing we used to have. So pretty much, I think I had a lot of friends who also were from much better to do families. So I used to say that they have much more sports equipment or whatever it is. So I had been used to finding and if I look back on it now, one of the things I feel that I had never felt, very uncomfortable with it. Let me give you an example. It's like when I moved from some of these schools to other schools where there were kids from much better financial background. Obviously, they used to have much better dresses. They used to have much better, everything, in terms of what you would typically have. Some of them tend to, also bully the ones who are not so so well off. This guy doesn't have great dress. Why is he wearing such a shitty dress? So having gone through that, it's not only me, there were also others. It's not that I was alone. So I think one had developed an ability to not really bother beyond a point, to make the best that is possible. So let me tell you, when I didn't get medicine and I went into engineering, I thought I was going to find it very difficult to put up with it. But just like I told you, it took me 2 months to adapt to the fact that I was no longer number one in my school. It might have taken me a couple of months. But once I went into engineering, I realized it didn't take me so long to get over the fact that I had got rejected. I don't think it took me more than maybe a couple of weeks. And I was fully immersed into whatever I was trying to do there, because it was a new place, making new friends, getting adapted to a new way of living, the newfound freedom, as I mentioned. So when I look back, what you said is absolutely right. Typically, we always talk about successes, and if you look at back the rejections, there are many. So this one, which I mentioned, not getting placed in the first 2 days. Yeah, of course, on day 3 morning, I was, I would say, pretty much stressed, because I was really worried when I would end up after day 5, day 6. If the placement went that long, which it is not likely to do, with respect to the fact that we had a slightly bigger batch strength than before, then I might not get placed. But I would say day 3 I got placed. Of course, I did not get placed in one of the top-notch companies like Levers, anywhere else. But it didn't take me too long. I would say that, maybe, by the day I left the college, which was 3-4 days later, maybe, or a few days later, I was pretty much, not worried about it anymore. When I went to Philips, I went there, as I mentioned, irrespective of the fact that I got a pretty, a bleak feedback from the ones who had done summer training there. I went there with positivity, and I found a lot of things positive.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. If I went to Levers or P&G or Nestle or anywhere else, I would be a very small fish in a very big pond. So in Philips, I found I was probably the second batch of management training. And the good thing was the company was trying to make a change. It was a traditional company, with the traditional, typical Dutch European company, where people have their own kingdom and they are used to working at a certain pace. Don't push too hard. Don't be very aggressive. And when this new management trainings were taken in, they used to say, "Arey, abhi director material aa gaya." These are all guys who think they know everything. So, and I think, I thoroughly enjoyed it because, one, they had brought us all on with an objective of making a difference. And when I told you that after 5 years, most had quit and I had not. Now, I could look at it as 2 ways. One, I'm an idiot. I'm staying here. But for me, I took it as I was resilient. I was the only guy who could fight. And it was not that I gave up because, all through, I made my point wherever I had to make my point. The company took good care. I must also say that, whenever you perform, they had no qualms in, saying normally people to become area manager would take 5 years and I'm giving you in 1 year. So I always felt, I saw the good part of it, that if I had done the same kind of stuff in a company like Levers or P&G or Nestle, anywhere else, just top-notch companies at that time in marketing, you probably would not, as I mentioned, it is either you want to be a small fish in a big pond or a big pond or a big fish in a small pond. It's the way you look at it. And I felt that in my 15 years of career, it was a fantastic experience in Philips. So I did not find anything. And so what I'm trying to say is, it took me not too long to get over the rejection. And over time, I've realized that I think, if you ask me, actually, one of the things that have stood me in very good stead, actually, is the fact that, for me, it doesn't take too long to get over a failure. And what I try to do is, hey, you didn't get, I could have been worse and not found a job at all after my campus. No, I found a job in a reasonably good company. So let's look at it as an opportunity to make a career there, to make an impact in that job, in that company, make a significant contribution. As I mentioned also, it's only then, thereafter also in many of it's not that every role, everything has been successful. I would say 70% were failures. Only 30% was successful. The good thing was 30% was good enough. And, the problem is if you keep dwelling on the 70%, you will spend far too much energy and time focusing on the negative. And then, your energy, which you can actually put to use in a much better way, will be dissipated. So over time, I developed this knack of, of not dwelling too much on something that didn't work, because it's no use, like you say, there's no use crying over spilled milk. There is really no use. So that's how I've got over it. I think the more failures I've faced, the easier it has become. It is not that it doesn't hurt me. It does. But it doesn't take me, if I don't do this month's target, it hurts me on the 30th that I have failed. But on the first, I'm not thinking about the 30th. I'm thinking of how can I make up this month for what I failed last month. So when you do that over and over again, I think it becomes a positive energy.
So I think one very important question for this channel is what advice would you give to people who to be resilient and handle rejections and failures in a practical way, rather than just saying that move on, etc. But what would be one or two practical tips?
See, first thing I would say is, you have to place what we term as failure in a real context. How bad is it? How bad it really is really it? You take it as a failure, a grim and serious failure, when you look at what could have been. But there's an equal what could have been on the other side. Like I said, if I look at, I got placed, I didn't get placed in day one and day two. In spite of having been one of the top 10 guys in marketing, I could have said, then you start thinking, okay, the guys who came to recruit are crazy. Then you start going in that direction to make yourself feel good. On day 3, I was worried, but on day 4, I was pretty happy, because you remember on day 3 morning, my thinking was, what happens if I don't get placed? And day 4 morning, I was a very much happy and relieved guy that I didn't end up not having a job at the end of day 5. So the moment I placed it in context and changed the frame of looking at it, the whole thing changed. Similarly, like medicine, I didn't get medicine, but there could have been a situation where I neither got medicine nor engineering. Then I would be forced to do something else, which at that point of time was not considered so great. But so then I looked at, there were 2 choices. I said, okay, let's try my best in whatever I've got, and then work with it. And that's pretty much, I wouldn't say it's anything, I can't, for example, give any advice which is very high front. I can only say the very basic stuff which I have practiced. I think change the frame of reference. And I mentioned,
So change the frame of reference rather than just failures, and what the best scenario was. You're saying take it to the other side as well, see it full.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one. Second is, you probably did not do as well as you yourself wanted to do. It's not only somebody else's expectation, it is your own expectation that you're failing to meet. I think that's the second part of it. And I always say, when you do something and you're successful, you will earn. Either you will earn, credit, you'll earn your reputation, you'll earn money, you will earn something else. But if you fail, you will learn. And then what do? You use the learning the next time. And I pretty much seldom found, when we do this, we seldom fail at the same thing twice. So I say, I always tell also my team that, either you will learn or you will learn. Either you earn or you learn. It doesn't matter. Because finally, you're not going to make it all in one day. You're going to make it, like I always say, it's inch by inch. It is step by step. So you might have missed one step today. There's a tomorrow. We can take 1 step, 2 steps tomorrow maybe. That's the whole thing. Looking at changing the frame of reference and seeing what best you can do in that situation to go forward. And like I mentioned, 15 years in Philips, I questioned myself many times. Did I make the right decision, staying for so many years? But if I look back today and I say that, okay, in hindsight, okay, now I can say that probably I did not make any major error in not moving out much earlier. So while those times, many people used to tell me, hey, I think you are making a mistake. You're worried that you cannot get a job anywhere else. But so you look back and you feel like it's not so bad.
So other thing is what also you mentioned, that 30% success and 70% failures, but this 30% is enough. So your whole basket actually would contain a lot of failures and people won't know about them. That is the only difference.
That's the only thing. That's what also I tell my teams. For example, there's something called inertia. Some people think, and it's not, I won't say some people think, I think it comes over time with, by just thinking that, hey, the best thing is not to do anything. Because then you don't fail. If you don't try, like you say, the ship is safest when it is in the harbor. So when you try, you gotta fail. Okay. And I always tell everybody, there is something I've learned my experience. The guys who fail the minimum are the ones who don't try enough. This I learned also from the companies. Like, is it better to aim too high and miss than aim too low and hit? There are people who argue very strongly both ways. They say that if you aim and miss all the time, the team tends to be dejected. And if you aim and little low and hit, hey, you say that you have achieved. But what I say is, again, it's the way you project for that to the team. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. You can say that I aimed for 25% growth and delivered 20 and say, failed.
So my other question is, if you look at the last 2-3 stints,
Yeah.
where you had to really fuel the growth at a very high pace in different settings.
Yeah.
So what in hindsight, what allowed you to do that?
Yeah. So I would say, just somebody was talking to me a few days back, and I was thinking, I think a leader is very much like a coach. The coach is not playing the game. The team is playing the game. The second thing I always say is the same strategy and style is not going to work everywhere, because the mistake sometimes we make, and I also made the mistake, is thinking that what worked here will also work there. So I think the first thing, and let me give you an example. In Philips, when I joined, Philips, although may not be recruiting from day one in business schools, was recruiting from top-notch schools. I had started recruiting from top-notch schools. It was always recruiting from good engineering colleges. So one of the things, in Philips was, I realized over time that, your job as a leader, as you go along, is very much setting the direction. And this is very much true in any of the top-notch companies. If you set the direction, there are a lot of people capable enough to execute. So if I said that, we want to increase distribution in X city by 20%, I just needed to say so. And people would, of course we'll debate if that's the right ambition, is it doable, and so on and so forth. But there were people do it. The biggest shock I got was when I moved to Grohe, in the sense that, Grohe, small company, unknown company, doesn't go to any top-notch B schools, recruits from mid-tier schools. So if I tell the same thing in Grohe, there would be stunned silence, because they will think, okay, I mean, they don't want to say, they don't want to ask, because the guy will think the guy will think that we don't know. But the fact is, very different kind of people, and the ambition was even much more dramatic. I had to quadruple the business. Philips was happy with 15% growth. So here I had to change completely my way of approach. I had to become a playing coach, a coach who will play with the team. It's not enough to tell this is the way we do it, or this is what you need to do. You got to do it with them. Hey, but suddenly you find they're not learning quickly enough. You got to do it again and again and again. For example, one of the strategies we decided was, when I joined Grohe, we did not have any of the top builders buying from us. Everybody used to buy Jaguar. So one of the strategies we said, we must crack 50% of the top 50 builders in India. So this is a strategy we made, and the team said, okay, boss will go do it. Of the 2 months, we found we were making pretty much no headway. That's the initial first time I started to realize that the only way to make this happen is to participate in this whole thing yourself. It goes against traditional management thinking. It says you need to empower the team and let them do it. But here I had to play a playing coach, go with them. In the first couple of meetings, I did not talk much. I was only observing what was happening. It took us, I would say, a couple of months more to make a crack. Not that I did anything fundamentally different. I only pushed in very limited, but I helped them on critical moments. And believe me, after 3 to 4 months, not only did we crack, I did not have to go anymore on any of those calls. I started developing the ability. The second thing I realized is what they lacked in skills, they more than made up in commitment and hard work. One of the things, when you have too many experts around the table, is a lot of time is spent debating.
Okay.
And less time is spent in actually executing. But the thing I realized when I was in Grohe is, when you have comparatively less experts, while you have to be a playing coach, there is less dissent. Once agreed, there is much more. It's more like an army. They will act on it and won't keep questioning every day, hey, is this the right way? Okay. So I would say, again, a very different experience. Again, if I come to Crompton, for example, my most recent experience. Hey, now this company is somewhere between, when I joined, was still between a Philips and a Grohe. And in a couple of ways. We don't go to top-notch business schools. The company never used to go to business schools. Now we do. But we used to have, access to better people. Not as good as in Philips, but definitely better than Grohe. Okay, so there I have. So now the question is, do I play playing coach or do I play, The problem is the scale of the issue is multiplied. It was 200 crores. I could play a playing coach because very much in 3 months, I knew every customer. I knew every one of the 150 employees, including their families, everything. Now, when I came to 5,000 crores or 4,000 crores, the issues were very similar in Grohe and Rakwal. Not the issues very less, because here the company is also undergoing a transformation in terms of ownership, the ambition. But the scale of the problem was multiplied by, say, 25 times, because the fact that we have 5,000 customers instead of 150, 2,000 people instead of 200. So here I quickly realized that the playing coach style not going to work, because I'm not going to know in any case. So here my challenge was, the company still needed playing coaches, because if I told my sales guy, hey, go and make a channel plan or a beach plan, in a company like Lever and in Nestle, they could do it 100 times over by keeping their eyes closed. Here, if I said beat plan, they will say, whom are we supposed to beat? It's like beating up somebody, you see. So I needed to create playing coaches. So I said, Here what will happen is my 25, 30, 40 key managers, they got to be playing coaches. Job is becoming something like a master coach. Coach them and let them do the job, level down. So it took me time to realize that, believe me, it took me 6 months to 1 year to realize that my previous work style won't work. I understood. Then striking the right balance between task and people took time for me to strike the right balance. And once we got that, I think life became easier. Not easy, but easier. And then it started slowly improving and developing. And that's why I see that the trajectory of the performance, everything started to follow that. So different styles. The other thing I think, Rohan, I want to mention is, as a coach, as I mentioned, you don't have the same style and you don't have the same strategy everywhere. The other thing very important, which I have practiced in my life, you don't get the team the way you want.
Yes.
There is one style of leadership, and I have seen when CEOs or leaders come in, they bring their own team, 10, 15 people with whom they have succeeded everywhere. Now, to me, that is, for me, I never done that because I feel it is wrong on two people, on two organizations. The organization which you're leaving because you are destroying the organization you created. And then you're not doing fair, justice to the people in the new company, because without even giving them a chance, without even giving a chance to them to perform, so that's another thing which gives a lot of confidence to the teams you get into. Because especially when I came to Crompton, with the leadership change, the ownership change, the whole organization was in a little bit of a worry. They were worried. What's going to happen? Is the new leadership going to bring 100 people and replace? So that helps everywhere. That helps in terms of building the confidence initially. So when I say that's also an integral part of the whole agenda, people think it's only marketing and sales, but it is also simple things like these, which I think eventually play a role in making that work, apart from different style and strategy.
Okay. So I want you to step back a little and think of one or two core events that shaped your personality. Which events will show up?
I will say a couple of events, but I will also say a couple of people more than events. I don't think it's one event which completely changed anything, but I would say people. I spoke about my father, who, for example, in spite of, from his family, as I mentioned, he was seven kids. He was youngest, and I think he was the only one who really pursued his education. Although his father, was willing to support, but not to that full extent, because he had 7 kids to take care of. You see, so he found his own way out. So and then as I mentioned, our upbringing was pretty frugal. But we never missed anything. So that was one, I think, the kind of stuff that I learned from him. The values and the second is my grandfather, who's in terms of discipline, in terms of timeliness, in terms of ethics. Even today, I can tell you with a lot of pride in my 25 years of career, I have never been late for any meeting. Be it traffic. People say traffic. In my mind, sometimes I find it difficult to also accept from others. True. So that is one, the whole value system. I think the other things are, let me give you an example of, one of the things in Philips, for example. Philips was always strong in the urban markets. At some point of time, they always used to say, we must build presence in rural, semi-rural. But it never used to happen because, for the guys who are running sales, they would rather spend that time pushing some extra sales in urban. Why worry about all this stuff? So one day they decided, not decided. As I was part of the team, which thought that the only way it's going to work is going to put a separate team. Okay, then this whole debate happened. Okay, Philips brand is too expensive, too premium. Okay, will it work in this market? So after a lot of debate and kind of stuff, we decided we will have a second branch. So I was tasked to build that business with a separate sales organization, which is not going to be part of. It will be, of course, part of the Philips company, but we will have a separate sales organization. And we had a factory in Mohali, which was a separate legal entity from Philips. So it would be housed under that. That company would produce this brand. We also had the brand name Jyoti. We hired about 30, 40 people. A lot of work was done. We said we will start with bulbs and then expand. A lot of work. We made all this jingle, what will be the launch jingle, like, Ye Desh Ki Jyoti. Everything was fantastic. We were roaring to go. So proposal goes for approval. And unfortunately, Philips that time globally decided, not for this project, that there will be and there cannot be any more second brand in the company because company would rather focus on building the Philips brand. So here I have recruited 30 people, who have come from leaving their jobs in Coke and Pepsi and everything else, set up this whole infrastructure to get rolling. There I was, that was one event which for a moment, it's one of the few events I would say in my working life, which completely set me off because, I was for a moment lost because there's 30, 40 people whose careers were on the line. Because, when my bosses told me this project is unfortunately scrapped, so please get rid of these people, because yeah, of course they said, they were nice guys. They said please get rid of them in a nice way, but getting rid of them, still getting rid of them. No, what about the jobs they had in Coke and all these places? So it was something which shook me up. I could hardly sleep for a few days, and I was thinking, what to do. I knew that Philips wouldn't absorb these people that easily. Globally, there was an operation going on called Operation Centurion, which was paring down the people. So I then asked my boss for I presented a proposal that we will, instead of doing it, we'll do the Philips brand, but everything else, the channel approach, the new channel approach, everything else we will build separately, and we will not put it part of the Philips main organization. So they gave me a time of 3 months to prove
that this
what I had on paper, what I had on paper is going to work. They gave me 3 months. They only told me one thing. 3 months this time you have. If you don't succeed, then those guys have to go. But we will keep you. We will not, because we're not sacking you. So it was like, it was a hell of a job. But believe me, in 3 months, the project was so successful that eventually my next role in the company was as the Asia Pacific distribution head. And that was because the project had seen such phenomenal success that the Asia Pacific CEO at that point of time picked me to do this for the whole of Asia. And believe me, think of it. I myself was questioning, if Philips brand to chale gaye, what will happen to these 30 people if we fail? So it was one event which gave me enormous confidence. I told you, in Philips I was 15 years. So the fact that I could take that risk with Grohe was because of the confidence I had developed. That if I could do this, I could do the thing as well. So that prompted me to eventually take that big risk, which everybody took. At that point of time, coined it as a foolhardy decision. But in hindsight, I feel that was the best career move I made.
So what has been the biggest dilemma you have ever faced, the most difficult decision of your life?
I would say definitely this Grohe one was a very difficult decision for me.
Leaving Philips to Grohe.
Yeah, in spite of the fact that I had a lot of confidence, because many people, what do you do when in 15 years you have not changed a job? Okay, what do you do when you get an opportunity? And an opportunity that is not so obvious. If I was offered a role in some big company in a big role, I could take it without too much of consultation. I asked many people, and I asked about, I would say 5 or 6 people whom I considered very close, and knowledgeable people, and the problem for me was my heart was telling me to take it, but this 6 or 7 people whom I asked, not one advised me to take it. My problem there was, if even 1 or 2 had said, I would be willing. So when 6 or 7 people whom I trusted a lot and who are doing it with a lot of good intent said, they said in 15 years they spent in this company, you can always spend another year. And there was a very high chance that if I stayed a couple of years in Philips more, I could become the Philips Lighting India business head, which would be managing a 3,000 crore business rather than the 50 crores which I was going to manage here. But the chance, I would say, was 70-30. 70 was I would get it, 30 I wouldn't get it. So many people told me the 70-30 role had chance. Why are you doing this? So it was a big dilemma for me. I spoke to my family, my wife, and she obviously said that when she was, of course, supportive of whatever I would do, but she wanted eventually the decision to be left to me, because the good thing she did is she helped me frame the pros and cons. And I thought back and I said, what happens if I fail? And I felt that the track record I had built in Philips was good enough for me to fall back on. Not that I will go back to Philips and get a job. I could
find something else.
Yeah, but I could find something. So that eventually, in spite of the fact that not one person had said that I should take it, and when I asked my parents, they said it's Philips. They had heard of the company. So they said, they did not say don't take it, but they said that you think again. And eventually, I reached that decision going against it. The only thing I followed was my heart, which said, no, the only thing I did, Rohan, is I went to the company's headquarters in Düsseldorf. The only thing I wanted to get clear is, did the company have a long-term perspective? I was serious about the India, because private equity and all, I used to hear a lot of stories at that point of time. Ye to, kya hoga? If you don't deliver in 3 months, they'll kick you like a sponge out. So I went there to understand the company is serious, what are the kind of people I'm going to work with. And at the end of that, I know that my heart was tilting more and more there. So in spite of all the head side decisions going this way, it was a dilemma, because it was a tough call to make. I made that call, and for me, it was probably the best decision I took. Believe me, if I go back there and you ask me to make the same decision again, I'm not so sure I will make the same decision again.
So in addition to whatever you have shared so far, is there anything else which has kept you anchored in difficult times?
I would say family And again, some of the very core values. Eventually, I think one goes back to one's core value. Think about So let me give you an example. I think it also some of the messages that were going on some of the groups this morning also triggered my thinking. That even when my career progressed, I think one thing that for example, I have not progressed in I would say in tandem is lifestyle, for example. That goes back, and I was thinking why did why did you not become splurging or doing things like that? You could afford to do a little bit at least, if not too much. And then goes back, and I really thought, why? Believe me, even when in the Philips and all that, and my career grew, typically as your grades grow, you start to have, your travel when you have travel rules are more liberal. But I always used to find it difficult. I should, what I would spend myself if I'm paying for it myself was what I would be happy to do, because that's again a core value, I think, frugality. So, again, I go back and I spoke to you about this fate, the things that didn't work out, the failures and the way resilience was built. So that has been a big learning point. If I felt that, I moved from Philips to Grohe and could make it work, I could move from Racold to Crompton and could make it work with very different set of people, with very different kind of ownerships. And believe me, with every time you have faced that rejection or faced that failure and come out without, I wouldn't say unscathed, but came out without being, completely in bad shape. I think, and then you realize that what can it be? Okay, you did not deliver what you had committed this week or this quarter. There's always a way. And let me give you also an example. I told you in Crompton, one of my experience was I got the complete balance between task and the people. Okay. I was staying too task focused because I wanted, when the initial 1 year of dilemma was there, that there was overwhelming feeling, of managing this whole new big company with all the changes that were happening, ownership, people. So one of the things was I got, when the task was not happening the way it should, there was a massive shift on the task. And I was less focused on people. And I think one of the things I've learned, which also gives me anchored, is for example, I have no problem saying that, I am acutely aware of my limitations, for example. So I never consider, if you ask me, why am I doing this interview with you? But I always question is, what's so great for me to do this interview with you? Nothing great. It's just, so I go back and say, am I the best person to have spent this 20 years and reach this position? I think no, there are many others who wouldn't have the right opportunity. So all this thinking that you have that, you're just a normal guy doing normal stuff. And with the effort of, the values you have got, the learnings you have got over time, that's what has helped you to come here. So it makes you feel there's nothing dramatic. If you make one mistake, you can do it. As I mentioned, 70-30. 70% have failed, only 30% have succeeded. So if you have one more setback, I put that as 70, becomes 71. Biggest thing is family. The fact that, you have a family to go back to. And I told this a few days back, family is a foundation and a sanctuary. You go back, you have a family that is very supporting. That makes a big difference. As I mentioned, my wife moved so many times when I had to move. But anytime, you have stresses. Of course, in this kind of life, you have a lot of stresses, but you go back, you are able to unwind. Mm-hmm. You think of all the tough times you have crossed, you have passed, when you didn't have what you wanted to have, when you made the mistakes, when you had the dilemmas, made a lot of mistakes, but nothing. But today you're okay. I mean, you're done reasonably okay. So that is what I would say I go back and think about in turbulent times when things are not going as well. Because the first year and a half was difficult. Although I never showed it outside. And people always used to think that Crompton was going in the right direction. But I never, I went back, when I just had this task, balance mismatch, I went and asked my team, what am I doing wrong? Why am I seeing the glass half empty rather than half full? And they held the mirror to my face. But the good thing was, since I never had any big hang-ups that, I've arrived because I've succeeded because I'm great, I could go back and correct those things. So I think that's also very important, that, thinking that you have not made it because of anything great you have done, but because of small stuff you've done over time. And that makes it much more easy for you to get back to when you are finding something tough. So nothing dramatic, no hard, big fundas. It's just, I think, small things, I would say.
Yeah, small things consistently done over time.
Absolutely.
With humility rather than
absolutely. So if you ask me, are there success mantra? I would say I can't really think of success mantra. I can only say small things, inch by inch, make mistakes, learn, and there are people who are around you, and they will do it for you. Be a good. I think another thing, very important thing which I forgot saying is very important to build pride and trust. I realized that over time that if you win the trust of the team, like even when I had this problem with being too task focused, not being focused on people, I think The one thing that I never lost was trust, because they felt that this guy can be harsh. You always get what you see, or you see what you get. So it's not. So that's also very important. Pride and trust. I think trust, something very important. Once they trust you, they will do anything that is required to make it work. They're willing to put up with a lot of your shortcomings, because again they see that the 30% good in you will overshadow the 70% which they might like you to improve. No? And when they see you're willing to make a small improvement every time, well, that's it. That's enough.
So one final question is, what advice would you give to a smart, driven leader or a leader in making?
So I think to be modestly successful and to come up with, you don't need to be outrageously talented. That's the first thing. You just need to be a normal guy with normal talent. I would say you don't need to be with IQ of super IQ. You just have to be normal guy. Okay? I think that's one thing that's very important. Second is, I think you have to remain anchored to a set of values. Whatever it is, you have to remain anchored. You have to be, that makes you predictable and consistent. So that I think is very important. The I would say consistency, predictability, that I think is very important. I would say, I think the ability to handle failure, which you mentioned, I think because failure will come. Okay, irrespective of what you think about successful people, failure is going to come many times. So the ability to handle failure and develop your own coping mechanism, I think, is very important. And last but not least, as I mentioned, develop trust and pride in the team and be a good human being. I think the team will see through it. If you're a good human being, the team will see through it and they will support you. So that's all I have to say. I think there's no major other advice I can give.
So thank you very much for all the candid stories. And absolutely. I'm sure all these stories will help the viewers into absolutely. Becoming a better leader.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Rohan, and share whatever little I could. I hope it will be useful for somebody at some point of time when they face similar problems.